This week, the Big Tennis took a beating, and not just on the
Oh,
court, really more off the court. Overrated. How do we not see this coming? The Big Ten's not overrated, is it, Jerry?
well, not based on 4 months. They earned the seeds they got. That's not really the problem. The problem is that they tanked when they got there. In terms of tournament performance, it's a complete face plant. But it doesn't mean
Hmm.
that the Big Ten was overrated. It just means that for whatever reason, Big Ten teams did not perform well in this tournament. Michigan's still in the Sweet 16, which they were seeded to be, but Illinois is not, and Iowa's not, and Ohio State is not, and Purdue is not. And those were four teams that did have Sweet 16 level seeds. So that's obviously, really disappointing for the league. And then on the other hand, Rutgers and Maryland each won a game as double digit seeds.
Hmm.
And Rutgers had Houston beat and quit playing, really should be in the Sweet 16 themselves. There's no getting around that this is an abysmal performance by the Big Ten in this tournament, especially given how good they were in the regular season. It's not like the Big Ten was overrated because they didn't perform well in the tournament. They were so disappointing in the tournament because of how good they were in the regular season.
Totally great. There's a huge difference between disappointing and underperforming and being overrated. I'm with you. Absolutely fair to say the Big Ten disappointed. They underperformed for sure. But
It
right.
might be the worst performance ever by a conference in the
Ooh,
tournament.
really?
I haven't gone back just based on how many teams they had and how they were seeded. I'm going to go back and figure it out. I haven't yet. Just off the top of my head, I can't think of another conference that put this many teams in the tournament or got this many high seeds and face planted the way the Big Ten did.
I'm glad you brought that up because, right, 9 teams from the Big Ten made it. Only one is advancing Michigan to the second round, second weekend. Is all of these 8 of the 9 teams losing? Is that a consequence of maybe the Big Ten season being a grind, being challenging? I remember,
No,
growing up.
I think as much as anything, it's matchups and I like Michigan State. Michigan State struggled all year. They
Hmm.
could have beaten UCLA. They didn't. They were good enough to beat UCLA, but they weren't good enough on the day they played UCLA. Rutgers and Maryland, like I said, one is lower seeded teams and then lost. So they performed a seed, actually better than seed. But Purdue got a matchup. Purdue's one of the youngest teams in Division One and got a matchup with a bunch of seniors that you know outplayed them. And just were more aggressive and had a better day. And it was an overtime game, but still, they, it was not a great matchup for Purdue. Illinois just flat tanked against Loyola. Ohio State was a complete no-show against Oral Roberts, who
Hmm.
had a above level day and has had two above level days
Yeah.
to get to where they are. So I mean, sometimes you're just caught up in it. Iowa, I don't know. Iowa was a bad defensive team most of the year. The last 3 weeks, it looked like they started caring about it, and then Oregon lights them up. So that was just that. Iowa was almost predictably going to lose before they should have, because their defense had been so bad. So it was just that somebody took advantage of it. It's just sometimes it's just matchups and the any given day nature of the sport.
I'm with you there, Jerry. Is it fair to point to the style of play? Because there's a common theme. It's still physicality. It's still, there's a big man presence in the Big Ten, maybe compared to other conferences that are more run and shoot, more guard heavy. Is it fair to point to maybe the style of play in the Big Ten as, again, a small, I'm with you here. It's just more every game is a different sort of factor to look at. Is there a style of play that maybe is a common denominator for some of these teams that could kind of equate to early tournament losses compared to, maybe other conferences that play a different style overall?
Well, okay, so Iowa's style, Iowa does have a big man,
Hmm.
although he's versatile, and he had a fantastic day, but their guard stunk,
Hmm.
and but Iowa's problem all season long when they had problems is they didn't play defense. Okay, so it had nothing to do with big men. It's that they didn't play defense. Um, Ohio State was not a big man centered team. They're much more the guard oriented team that you were talking about, but they were flat.
Hmm.
For whatever reason, they could not match Oral Roberts' energy and execution for most of that game. They had about a 10 to 15-minute stretch in the second half where it looked like they were going to come back, and then they petered out at the end again, and in overtime. So that's that's not so it doesn't apply to them. Purdue is a big man centered team, um, but the problem for Purdue was that their guards didn't play well. Their big men, Travion Williams had a decent game, especially the second half. But Purdue's problem, most of the second half of the season at least, was they were a second half team. You can't get away with that in the NCAA tournament, and they didn't.
Hmm.
So it's not a style of play thing. You're trying to draw conclusions, grand conclusions, instead of looking at the individual matchups, and that doesn't work. You can't draw grand conclusions other than as a league, the Big Ten underperformed badly.